The night was quiet on Elmwood Drive. The kind of quiet that only comes with money, wide lawns, tall iron gates, and neighbors who slept without worrying about what morning would bring. But at 9:47 p.m., 3 police cruisers broke that silence. Red and blue lights splashed across the stone facade of the largest house on the block, a 4-bedroom colonial with white columns and a circular driveway lined with dogwood trees. The kind of home people spend entire lifetimes working toward. A woman stood in the driveway. She wasn't running. She wasn't shouting. She was holding a single box of belongings, framed photographs, a coffee mug, a folded flag, the kind of box you carry on the first day of something important. She had just arrived home. "Ma'am, put the box down and place your hands where we can see them." She looked at the officer. Calm. Completely, unervingly calm. She set the box down on the hood of her car with the careful precision of someone who had been in difficult rooms before and survived every single one. "Officer," she said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Hands behind your back. Now." The handcuffs clicked shut. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flickered on. Then another. Someone had their phone raised already. The live stream had started before the second cruiser even pulled in. And as the officers walked her toward the squad car, none of them, not one, knew that the woman they were arresting was Dr. Renee Caldwell. The woman who, in less than 12 hours, would be their boss. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Renee Caldwell was. Not the title. Not the badge. The woman. Renee grew up in Delton, a city that most maps didn't bother to label correctly. A city where the police were something you feared, not something you trusted. Where sirens in the night meant someone you loved was in trouble, and the people showing up to help sometimes made things worse. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. Her father had left when Renee was 6, not dramatically, not violently, he had simply stopped coming home one Thursday, and by Saturday, the silence had settled in like furniture. Renee was the kind of child who asked why. Why are things this way? Why does it work like this? Who decides? Her teachers called her difficult. Her grandmother called her destined. She graduated high school at the top of her class, earned a criminal justice scholarship to state, and then, when everyone expected her to take the safe corporate path, she applied to the police academy. Her mother cried. Not from pride. From fear. "That world doesn't want you," she'd said, gripping Renee's hand at the kitchen table. "And the ones it does want, they don't last long either." Renee had squeezed her hand back. "Then I'll change the world." Nobody believed her. But nobody had ever really believed in Renee, and she had made a career out of proving people wrong in rooms they'd never expected her to enter. She entered the academy as the only black woman in her cohort. She graduated second in her class. The cadet who ranked first had a father who served on the oversight board, and 2 witnesses later confirmed that the final exam scores had been quietly adjusted. Renee knew. She filed a complaint, was told there was insufficient evidence, and went back to work. That was the first time the system tried to break her. It would not be the last. Over the next 2 decades, Renee did what most people considered impossible. She made detective in 6 years, faster than any woman in the department's history. She cracked a citywide trafficking network that 3 senior officers had quietly been protecting for years. She testified before a federal grand jury. She was profiled in a national magazine. And at every single step, someone put something in her way. A supervisor who gave her the worst precincts, the coldest cases, the files nobody else wanted. A captain who never put her name on the arrest reports her work produced. A review board that twice, denied her promotion citing leadership temperament concerns, a phrase so vague it could mean anything and was designed to mean nothing. Each time, Renee documented everything. She kept a file. Not out of bitterness, but because she understood early that evidence was the only language power respected. Names. Dates. Emails. Discrepancies. A paper trail stretching back 15 years. Her colleagues called it paranoia. She called it preparation. By the time she was 44, Renee had a PhD in criminology, a record that any department in the country would have killed to claim, and a reputation that had reached the office of the city's new mayor, a woman named Patricia Owens, who had been elected on a single, thunderous promise. Reform the Hargrove City Police Department. The department had been under federal scrutiny for 3 years. Use of force violations. Evidence tampering. A cover-up involving 2 officers and a fatal traffic stop that had made national news. Mayor Owens needed someone who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and understood exactly how corrupt departments operated from the inside. She needed Renee Caldwell. The appointment was announced on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Renee Caldwell, the new police chief of Hargrove City. The press conference was electric. Reporters crowded the steps of City Hall. Mayor Owens stood beside Renee, beaming, as flashbulbs popped like a storm. But in the back row, 3 men in department dress uniforms watched with expressions that didn't match the applause. Their names were Captain Dale Mercer, Deputy Chief Frank Olin, and Internal Affairs Director Roy Stalls. They had run Hargrove City PD, quietly, systematically, and very profitably, for over a decade. And they had no intention of letting a woman like Renee Caldwell walk through those precinct doors. What happened next wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Renee had taken a full week between the announcement and her first official day. She'd used that week to visit her mother in Delton, to walk through the house she'd bought with her own savings, to sit on the back porch at night with a glass of iced tea and let the weight of what she'd built settle into her bones. The house on Elmwood Drive was not a symbol. It was a statement. It said, "I was told I didn't belong, and I built something beautiful anyway." On the evening before her first day, she drove back from City Hall where she'd been reviewing briefing files with Mayor Owens's chief of staff. She was tired. The good kind of tired, the kind that comes after meaningful work. She pulled into her driveway at 9:43 p.m., reached into the back seat for the box of personal items she planned to bring to her new office in the morning, and stepped out into the warm evening air. She didn't notice the cruisers until their lights snapped on. 3 of them. Blocking the street. Moving fast. 4 officers emerged, hands on holsters, moving with the practiced urgency of a controlled response. "Ma'am, this is the Hargrove City Police Department. We've received a report of a suspected break-in at this address. Step away from the vehicle." Renee blinked. She looked at the house, her house, with its familiar porch lights on timers she'd set herself, the security panel she'd programmed herself, the welcome mat that read home in her mother's handwriting because her mother had given it to her as a housewarming gift. "I live here," she said simply. "We'll need to verify that. Can you provide identification?" She set down the box. Reached for her purse. "Keep your hands visible, ma'am." Her jaw tightened. But she kept her voice level. "I am reaching for my identification. My wallet is in my purse." One officer, younger, clearly nervous, moved forward. His nameplate read Harris. "Is there anyone who can confirm your residence here?" "Officer Harris," she said, because she had already read his nameplate the way she'd been trained to read every room she entered, carefully, completely. "My name is Dr. Renee Caldwell. I was appointed as police chief of this department 4 days ago. My photo identification, my deed of property, and my departmental appointment letter are all in this purse." Something flickered across Harris's face. Uncertainty. But before he could respond, a voice crackled through the radio clipped to the senior officer's shoulder. "Suspect is described as a black female, medium height, driving a dark sedan. Anonymous tip confirmed suspicious activity. Proceed with detainment." The senior officer, his nameplate read Coach, which was apparently not ironic, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." I am your chief, Renee said. Still calm. Dangerously calm. Until we verify that, ma'am, you are a person of interest at an active call. Hands behind your back. The handcuffs clicked shut. Renee did not struggle. She did not shout. She did not cry. She stood perfectly still as they walked her to the cruiser, and she looked directly at the neighbor across the street who was filming everything on a smartphone with shaking hands. She held the camera's gaze. Record everything, her expression said. Every single second, they brought her to the 7th precinct, which was not, she noted with a cold precision that had nothing to do with surprise, the precinct closest to her home. Someone had made a deliberate choice about which house to send her to. The booking officer barely looked up when they walked her in. But the room, the overnight officers, the desk clerk, a young woman in civilian clothes waiting on a bench, fell into a particular kind of hush when Renee Caldwell walked through the door in handcuffs. Some of them recognized her face from the press conference. She could see the calculation happening in real time behind their eyes, the sudden, dawning horror of what is happening right now, but nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Because the senior officers were still in the room. Renee was placed in a holding room. Not a cell, she hadn't been charged, but a small, windowless space with a table bolted to the floor and 2 plastic chairs. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. 18 minutes later, Officer Harris knocked on the door and entered with an expression she had seen before on the faces of young people who had just realized that the institution they'd joined had just done something unforgivable in front of them. Dr. Caldwell, he said. His voice was unsteady. I've been able to verify your identification. Your appointment letter is on file with the department. He stopped. Swallowed. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, she told him quietly. Sit down. He sat. Who called in the tip? It came in as anonymous. Everything is recorded, Officer Harris. Anonymous tips still have routing numbers, timestamps, and origin points. She paused. Was the call internal? He looked at the table. That was answer enough. I need you to do one thing for me, she said. I need you to preserve that recording. Don't log it differently. Don't touch it. Just make sure it exists exactly as it was received. He nodded. Good. She stood. Now take off the handcuffs and get me a phone. But what Officer Harris didn't know yet, what even Renee didn't fully know, was that the recording was only the beginning of what had been done that night. Renee had called Mayor Owens from the precinct. The mayor arrived 41 minutes later in a black SUV with her deputy chief of staff and the city attorney. She walked into that precinct with the specific energy of someone who had been woken from sleep, who had made 3 phone calls in the car, and who was deciding, in real time, exactly how much damage she was willing to inflict. The moment she saw Renee standing in the hallway, calm, unhurt, and possessed of an expression that suggested she had been expecting something like this, Mayor Owens let out a long, controlled exhale. Are you all right? I'm fine. Renee looked at her steadily. But we need to talk about what this means. They sat in the precinct commander's office, a room the commander himself had quietly vacated, because there are moments when you understand, instinctively, that you should not be present. Renee placed her phone on the desk. On the screen was a photograph of a document, a memo, printed on department letterhead, dated 3 days ago. I found this in the briefing file your office sent over, Renee said. It was misfiled. Or left deliberately where I might find it. I haven't decided which yet. Mayor Owens leaned forward. The memo referenced a confidential security assessment of Renee's property, citing unverified neighborhood complaints and unresolved prior resident disputes. It had been submitted to the dispatch supervisor's office by Internal Affairs Director Roy Stalls. The same Roy Stalls who had denied Renee's promotion twice, 5 years ago, in a different city. He followed me here, Renee said quietly. Owens looked up sharply. Roy Stalls was brought in as IA director 11 months ago. 2 months after my name was first mentioned for this position. She picked up the phone. He's been building a paper trail designed to make any complaint I file look like a pattern of conflict with colleagues. He seeded false documents into dispatch records. And tonight, someone used those documents to justify an anonymous call. The city attorney was already typing. There's more, Renee said. There always is. She pulled up another photograph. This one showed a text exchange, not hers. A conversation between 2 numbers she had traced through a completely legal process involving a private digital forensics contractor she had hired 6 weeks ago, the moment she'd accepted the appointment. Because Renee Caldwell had learned, a long time ago, to prepare for war before the first shot was fired. The text exchange was between a phone registered to a company called Lakeview Consulting, which was a shell company, and a number that belonged to Deputy Chief Frank Olin. The texts were brief and damning. She moves in Tuesday. We need the op done by Monday night. Handled. Harris is on shift. He won't know what hit him. Make sure it sticks. It hadn't stuck. But someone had tried very hard to make sure it would. By 6 a.m., the story had broken nationally. The neighbor's live stream had been picked up by 3 major outlets before midnight. By dawn, clips were everywhere, the footage of Renee being walked to the cruiser in handcuffs outside her own home, the box of office supplies sitting abandoned on the hood of her car. The optics were catastrophic for the department. Captain Mercer appeared on a local morning show at 7:15 a.m., smoothly describing the incident as an unfortunate miscommunication that the department deeply regrets. He expressed full confidence in the incoming chief. He smiled the specific smile of a man who had spent a long time practicing looking sincere. The officers involved acted in good faith based on information they received, he said. We will be conducting an internal review. An internal review. Conducted by the same department that had orchestrated the arrest. For a few hours, it seemed like that might be where it stopped. A PR crisis managed, a statement issued, the machinery of institutional self-protection clicking smoothly into gear. Renee watched the morning show from her kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt something cold and steady move through her. They thought she was going to let them run the review. They thought she was going to be grateful for the apology and walk into that precinct chastened, slightly diminished, carrying the memory of handcuffs like a warning she was supposed to heed. They had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. They thought they'd rattled her. They had no idea what was coming. At 10 a.m., Renee arrived at the Hargrove City Police Department headquarters. Not the 7th Precinct. Headquarters. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. No jewelry except a thin gold watch that had belonged to her grandmother. She carried the same box of personal items from the night before, which Officer Harris had quietly retrieved from her driveway and left on her front step before his shift ended. She walked through the main entrance. The desk sergeant, a veteran named Morales who had served 22 years and had the practiced stillness of someone who had seen many things and said very little about any of them, stood as she approached. Chief Caldwell, he said. No hesitation. The word chief landed in the lobby like a stone dropped into still water. Sergeant Morales. She held his gaze for a moment. Good morning. She walked to her office on the 4th floor. And then, at 10:31 a.m., she submitted 2 things simultaneously. The first was a formal request to the FBI's Civil Rights Division for an independent investigation into the events of the prior evening, including the origin of the anonymous tip, the chain of authorization, and the involvement of department personnel in generating documentation used to justify the call. The second was a personnel action notice, signed, dated, and routed through the city attorney's office, placing Deputy Chief Frank Olin on immediate administrative suspension pending investigation. By noon, Roy Stalls had been served with a notice of investigation. Captain Mercer, who had spent his morning on television looking cooperative, received a written request for a formal recorded interview at 2 p.m. The department went very, very quiet. But that quiet was the kind that comes before something breaks, not the kind that means things are calm. Because Renee's file, the one she had been building for 15 years, contained things she hadn't shown Mayor Owens yet. Things she hadn't shown anyone yet. Things that went much deeper than a single night's arrest. Deputy Chief Olin had made one mistake that Roy Stalls, for all his careful planning, had not anticipated. He had used the same shell company, Lakeview Consulting, for 3 different operations over 6 years. Renee's forensics contractor had found all 3. The first was the orchestrated arrest. The second was a payment, $47,000, made to a city councilman who had twice blocked police reform legislation. The third, and most significant, was a series of transfers connected to a real estate development company that had received city contracts that had been steered to them by recommendations from the Hargrove City Police Department's Community Development Office. Community Development. The division Captain Dale Mercer had personally overseen for 8 years. When Renee spread the documents across the table in the conference room where she met with the FBI agent and the state attorney general's investigator, she watched both of them go still in the particular way people go still when they are looking at something they did not expect. This has been going on since 2017, the FBI agent said. At minimum, Renee confirmed. I believe it began earlier. These are the records I've been able to independently verify. Chief Caldwell. The state investigator set down a document. How long have you had this? I began compiling after my appointment was announced, she said. I suspected something like last night was possible. I wanted to be ready. There was a pause. You were arrested last night and today you handed us a RICO case, the FBI agent said. Renee picked up her coffee. I've been building toward this for a long time. But there was still one name in the file she hadn't mentioned yet. The one that would change everything. The name was Gerald Haynes. Gerald Haynes was the city's previous police chief, the man Renee was replacing. The man who had overseen the department for 11 years, who had been allowed to retire quietly with a full pension after the federal scrutiny began, who had given an interview calling Renee's appointment a promising step forward. He had not been promising anything. He had been terrified. Because Gerald Haynes was the architect of Lakeview Consulting. His name wasn't on any documents, that was by design, but his fingerprints were on the structure. His personal attorney had incorporated the company. His brother-in-law had signed several of the real estate contracts. When Renee called him directly, his private cell, from her office phone, with the call being recorded with the full knowledge and authorization of the state attorney general, the silence on the other end of the line lasted a very long time. Gerald, she said. I think it's time we met. He came to the meeting because he didn't have a choice. Because the alternative, the subpoena, the public arrest, the press cameras, was worse. He sat across from Renee in a conference room at City Hall, flanked by his attorney. She sat alone. You knew about last night, she said. Not a question. His attorney started to speak. Renee looked at him with the steady, patient expression of someone who had sat in harder rooms than this and waited. The attorney stopped. I heard about it, Haynes said carefully. You authorized it, she said. The call routing went through a number traced to your personal assistant. We have the metadata. More silence. The Lakeview transfers are documented, she continued. The councilman payments are documented. The real estate contracts, Gerald, it's all documented. Every layer. She paused. And what you need to understand right now, in this room, is that I am not interested in revenge. I am interested in accountability. Those are 2 very different things. Haynes looked at his hands. There are families, she said quietly, who lost people to officers in this department who were protected because of what you built. A young man named Marcus Webb died in a traffic stop 3 years ago and the officers involved were back on duty in 6 weeks. Because of what you built. Her voice didn't waver. This isn't about me. It was never about me. What happened last night was supposed to make me afraid. What it actually did was give me one more reason to make sure this ends. Haynes looked up. What do you want? Full cooperation with the federal investigation. Every document, every account, every name. Starting today. His attorney whispered urgently. Haynes was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. The federal indictments came down 6 weeks later. Deputy Chief Frank Olin. Internal Affairs Director Roy Stahls. Captain Dale Mercer. 3 others. And, quietly, without cameras, in a pre-dawn arrest that the department had nothing to do with, Gerald Haynes. The charges were extensive. Racketeering. Obstruction of justice. Abuse of official capacity. Evidence tampering. Civil rights violations. Officer Harris, the young officer who had cuffed Renee in her own driveway, had cooperated fully with investigators from the first week. He had preserved the tip recording exactly as she'd asked, had documented every instruction he'd received that night, and had provided a sworn statement confirming that he'd been specifically told to proceed with detainment regardless of what identification the woman provided. He had, investigators noted, been the only officer present who had shown visible hesitation. Renee recommended him for a commendation. It was not, she told Mayor Owens, about forgiveness. It was about recognizing the difference between people who participated in a system and people who had the moral clarity, even partially, even imperfectly, to pause. The department doesn't need purging, she said at a staff meeting, her first official one, standing in front of 200 officers who studied her with expressions ranging from relief to wariness to something that looked, in a few faces, like the early stages of respect. It needs rebuilding. There's a difference. Purging assumes everyone is the same. Rebuilding recognizes that most of you came here to do something good. We're going to figure out together how to actually do that. She paused. And I want to be very clear about one thing. She looked across the room. What happened to me last week? That cannot happen to anyone in this city. Not because of who I am. Because of who we are supposed to be. The file that brought down 6 senior officials. I built that file because the system gave me no other option. My job, our job, starting now, is to make sure nobody has to build a file like that ever again. The room was very still. Then Sergeant Morales, in the 3rd row, started to applaud. It spread slowly. Then all at once.